Let's get started. Welcome to the Peace Channel. My name is Mel Lehman. I'm the Director of Common Humanity, and we seek to build respect, friendship, and understanding between people in the Middle East and people here in the US. And we do that most of the time through culture. Now, behind us, you see paintings from the Middle East and a quilt from my own Mennonite Amish American heritage. So I'm trying to put those two together visually in our studio. We also have poetry, and today I'm very honored to welcome a distinguished Fulbright scholar, Professor Angela Lehman, who also happens to be my beloved niece. So if I get a little mixed up between referring to her with her distinguished academic heritage and my familiar name, you'll have to forgive me. We come from a family which is very interested in the Middle East. My uncle and Angela's dad's uncle, Irvin Lehman, was a professor of Old Testament, and he spent quite a bit of time in Palestine, Israel, and taught English as a second language at AUB, American University of Beirut. So our family goes back quite a long ways. But enough about me. Let's introduce my beloved niece and distinguished Fulbright scholar, Professor Angela Lehman. Angela Lehman is a writer and an educator in Richmond, Virginia. She has an MFA, a Master in Fine Arts, in poetry, and became interested in Palestinian literature after her first visit to the region in 2017, which I had a little bit to do about. Since then, she has been to Palestine and Israel 3 more times to travel, learn, and teach. Most recently, as a Fulbright scholar, wow, I'm very impressed, at Al-Ananja, you'll have to help me with that pronunciation, University in Nablus, Palestine, in the spring of last year. And then the pandemic hit. We'll hear about this in a moment. Currently, she teaches English language and global education courses at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Welcome, Professor. Welcome, my dear niece, Angela. Great to have you with us.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. My first trip to Palestine was actually, we started in Jordan, but with Mel, my uncle, and it was a life-changing experience because I decided that I just needed to learn more and go back, and I have, and you know, my first 3 visits were all about a week long. And then this past spring, when I was going to spend the whole semester there at Al-Najah University, but came back about a little more than halfway through because of COVID. But I'm still trying to keep in touch with people over there and keep learning, and really, really hope to go back one day. Okay, so I think, also I have to mention, and I forgot to grab the book, but on my mother's side, I believe my great-grandfather also spent time in the Middle East and wrote a book about his experiences in the Holy Lands. So I guess I have it from both sides.
Would that be
really the thing that got it started? Yeah.
Would that be A.D. Wenger?
Yes, yeah.
The distinguished founder of Eastern Mennonite University. So you've got Middle East love in your system there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we will get started today. I'm going to mostly be sharing my screen with some slides, and then talking and sharing some stories, sharing a bit of biography, and then reading one poem from 4 different poets. And this was maybe the most challenging part of the presentation, is just picking 4 poets and picking just one poem from each. So, if anyone's very interested, I can send more information, more reading recommendations, more poems, and so on. And also, finally, I also have to say, I do live on a fairly busy street. So sometimes, hopefully there won't be any sirens, but sometimes there might be a bit of noise. And if it's really loud, I will mute and pause for just a bit and then start up again. All right. So today, because we're kind of close to Valentine's Day, is the many faces of love in Palestinian poetry. And so we'll kind of see how love shows up in these poems in different ways. The main title is a line from a poem that we'll hear, if not for the lock of your hair. And again, many thanks to Common Humanity, to Mel, and then the Peace Channel on YouTube, where this will be posted later. All right, so, oops. We're going to start our trip in Nazareth, which is actually in the nation of Israel now. And this is one of the places that I went with Mel, and then back again in 2018. And the church, so if you're in Nazareth, you're probably there with a lot of other tourists. And you're probably there to see the Church of the Annunciation. Beautiful structure. And then right across from it is sort of spilling up the hillside is the market, in the old market in Nazareth. So perhaps you visited the church and then you wander through the market. Maybe you get a little lost, because that's very easy to do in these old markets. And then if you had been there about 12 years ago, you might have come across this man here selling souvenirs, maybe an olive wood cross or camel or something. Taha Muhammed Ali is one of Palestine's most noted poets, but for almost all his life, he owned a souvenir shop across from the Church of the Annunciation. And he taught himself English and literature by many, many late nights of reading and studying. And then eventually, as he started writing and became known for his poetry and his stories as well, he would travel around and give talks around the world, really. I love his poetry because it's so concrete. And he uses specific people and specific stories, and you really get a sense that these are real people, rather than, so before him, poetry often was very highly metaphorical and highly collective and highly one thing stands for many. But he focused on the specific. And, if you're interested in language, it's sort of, he was one of the first Palestinian poets to use colloquial Arabic in his poems rather than formal Arabic. So he was born in 1931 in a village outside Nazareth, actually a place that Mel and I were very close to during our visit there, and I went back and visited later. But during the 1948 war, after which Israel became a state, nation state, his family moved to Nazareth, and that's where he stayed ever since. So this next screen, we'll see a picture of where his village was, Sefuria. And this is a contrast between, you'll have to imagine it in 1931 when he was born, or 1947, right before the war. This image, if you just were looking at it, you might not even realize something's not right here. But if you go with the tour guide, which I did in 2018, you start realizing that, those rocks were part of a wall, or these trees are not really the right kind of trees. They were pine trees planted later by the state of Israel to grow quickly and kind of obscure the fact that a village was destroyed there. So here is what remains of Sefuria. And here's a poem from Taha Muhammed Ali. It's a love poem for a real woman, but then notice how it makes a link to place, right? So a specific person and then a place. Ambergris. Our traces have all been erased, our impressions swept away, and all the remains have been effaced. There isn't a single sign left to guide us or show us a thing. The age has grown old, the days long, and I, if not for the lock of your hair, auburn as the nectar of carob, and soft as the scent of silk that was here before, dozing like Arabian jasmine, shimmering like the gleam of dawn, pulsing like a star, I, if not for that lock of camphor, would not feel a thing linking me to this land.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
And I like, I wish I can't quite, do this over Zoom, but, if you could smell some jasmine and maybe taste a carob pod, which is very common over there. I wish I could give that to you too, but you'll have to use the words to imagine.
And this is a common phenomena throughout Palestine, Israel, that there were, I wish I had the number at my tip of my tongue, but there were hundreds, a couple thousand villages that suffered the same fate, Palestinian villages.
Right. And in some cases, people fled in advance of the battlefront, so to speak, and then were not allowed to go back. And then in other cases, villages were actually bombed or were the site of fighting. But I like this poem because it shows that the love for people and love for specific people is actually what keeps some of these memories alive, rather than just sort of an amorphous love for the past. So, and one other quick note, you see down at the bottom of the screen, I'm sorry, this poem, as most Palestinian poetry, was translated from Arabic. So I'm not good enough at Arabic yet to be able to read it in the original language. So I'm very thankful for translators.
But you're studying Arabic.
I'm studying, yeah, and I think I'm ready to. When I look at Arabic poems, I can recognize some words, but I'm not quite ready to get all the meaning out of the extra linguistic things that happen with poetry, right? The images and the idioms and so on. Okay, so we're going to go from the north of the country, Israel, and now we're actually going to go into Palestine proper. And we will meet the poet Ghassan Zaqtan. And he was born in Beit Jala, which is close to Bethlehem, sort of in the south of Palestine. And this photo here shows Ghassan on the left. On the right is a Palestinian American named Fadi Judah, who's a poet, a translator, and a doctor, actually, by trade. And he's actually the translator of the next poem that we'll look at. Ghassan Zaqtan also writes poems full of specific images. And you can imagine sights and sounds and smells almost. I wanted to point out that his father, Khalil Zaqtan, was also a poet and a UN aid worker. So even though Ghassan never lived in a refugee camp as a refugee, he spent a lot of time in Jordan, especially with his father, visiting refugee camps and working mostly with displaced Palestinians. And in fact, the poem that we'll read from him is, it's about his father, but you won't ever hear father, but you'll hear he. And the poem never quite states who he is. So you're left to maybe put somebody that you know in there, or imagine that it's the son and the father kind of together somehow. But I call this a love poem because I think it comes out, I think it's the poem that couldn't have been written without a deep love for his parents and the lives that they lived. So here, this is not, the poem is called A Picture of the House in Beit Jala. And it's not this house in particular, but you'll see a house from the old city. And then also you see a book of poetry that Ghassan's father, Khalil, published. So here's the poem, A Picture of the House in Beit Jala. He has to return to shut that window. It isn't entirely clear whether this is what he must do. Things are no longer clear since he lost them. And it seems a hole somewhere within him has opened up. Filling in the cracks has exhausted him. Mending the fences, wiping the glass, cleaning the edges, and watching the dust that seems, since he lost the things, to lure his memories into hoax and ruse. From here, his childhood appears as if it were a trick. Inspecting the doors has fully exhausted him, the window latches, the condition of the plants, and wiping the dust that has not ceased flowing into the rooms, on the beds, sheets, pots, and on the picture frames on the walls. Since he lost them, he stays with friends who become fewer, sleeps in their beds that become narrower, while the dust gnaws at his memories there. He must return to shut that window, the upper story window, which he often forgets, at the end of the stairway that leads to the roof. Since he lost them, he aimlessly walks, and the day's small purposes are also no longer clear.
Ah, wonderful. Do you have that on your screen share?
I don't. It was a little bit long. I think if I had put it on, the words would have been very, very small. But it's just for anyone who's listening, if you message Mel, I can, and send an email, I can send titles and clips and copies and things like that. So yeah, I'm happy to spread the love of Palestinian poetry.
Yes, info@commonhumanity.org. Our website is commonhumanity.org. This is wonderful. This is wonderful. Thank you, Angela. Beit Jala. I was in Beit Jala, I think. That's just near Jerusalem, right?
Well, I think it's a little bit between Bethlehem and Jerusalem.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never been there myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, let's now jump ahead in time to a younger generation of poets and another place in Palestine. The photo you see across the top is sort of a, not quite a bird's eye view, but a panoramic view of Ramallah, which is regarded as the cultural capital of Palestine. The presidential residence is also there. Very, very, not huge, not the biggest city in Palestine, but very cosmopolitan. And Maya Abu Alhayyat works, actually, I believe she lives in Jerusalem, but she works in Ramallah, where she directs the Palestinian Writers Workshop, which has a lot of programs for young people, young Palestinians and writing. She is an amazing writer. I love her poetry. I haven't yet read any of her other books, and unfortunately, she doesn't have any entire books yet translated into English, but appears in anthologies, or if you Google her on the internet, you can find more of her poems translated into English. She doesn't mince words. She says what she wants to say. And this quote here that you see on the screen is from an interview that I found on the internet with her. But I also had the chance to connect with her just over email when I was in Nablus this past spring. At the university, we were trying to put together an anthology of student writing, and we wanted to have sort of an external judges to help choose the selections. And I thought, why not? Let me just email her, see what happens. So I emailed her, of course. I said first, I love your poetry. And then I said, could you help us? And so we emailed back and forth, but then, everything became chaotic with COVID, and that never happened. But I think she's just a really generous, wonderful person and writes wonderful poetry. The one you'll hear is, maybe the first thing you'll hear is not love. But I think there's love in it, and I will let you, as you listen, figure out how this one poem holds many different emotions. So here's a scene from Ramallah, and here is her poem, Insight. I am waiting for a brave martyr's daughter to stand up and scream, "Take your homeland and give me back my dad." The almond blossom knows its life is short, but the bud cracks and yawns, and only when it falls on the streets of the school does happiness bloom. All the minutes of silence cannot return one voice to life. I've lived a life filled with heroes and complete bastards, and now I can no longer distinguish between them. I have seen children who gave their parents to the homeland, but I have never seen a homeland that gave an orphan a father. I want everyone to live and no one to fall, not even my demons, not even your demons. Maybe if not one of us falls, we will all rise above this hell.
What a moving, what a profound poem. Wonderful. Wow.
Yeah, I had a really hard time choosing which one of her poems because they all, I mean, the ones that I've read all have this really complex and nuanced mix of emotions or perspectives. Anyway, yeah, makes me especially want to learn to read them in Arabic.
Yes. And we're looking at martyrs, which are people who have lost their lives because of the conflict and the pain and struggle there. And that's a common sight throughout Palestine. Just as previously we saw the villages that were common sites throughout Palestine, this also is a common shared experience.
Yeah, memorials to martyrs. And I want to be clear, as you know, Mel, but maybe not everyone knows, that martyr here does not mean suicide bomber. Let's be absolutely clear. Martyr is an expansive term for anyone whose life was cut unnecessarily short by a conflict related to trying to retain the Palestinian identity.
Right.
I mean, that's my crude way of putting it. This Palestinian herself or himself could probably say it better, but I just want to be clear that when we talk about martyrs, this includes a wide range of people and reasons and perspectives. Yeah.
Excellent.
So now we will leave Palestine and go to Australia. I don't have a photo of Australia here because I actually don't know where Sara Saleh is from in Australia, but she is the daughter of a Palestinian mother and an Egyptian father who met partly because so many Palestinians are no longer in Palestine. And so Sarah's parents and Sarah herself have this, some of them feel very strongly this in-between existence of being Palestinian, being Arab, but no longer living in the Arab world. And in fact, she is a poet and a writer. I think her day job is related to human rights activism. She's currently pursuing a law degree, but is in Australia, participates quite a bit in the poetry scene there and just received a prestigious prize. And when I say just received, I think like 2 weeks ago, maybe, for a poem about Lebanese refugees in Sydney, Australia. So we're going to look at a poem from her that has a different kind of love. The love she talks about is the love of an instrument, the oud, which of course is, if you haven't seen one before, you look at it and you say, oh, that looks maybe like a lute or a guitar or a mandolin, and you would be right. It's sort of the great-grandfather or the great-great-great-grandfather of many of those instruments. So to me, this oud up here looks like maybe it's in a museum. Down in the bottom right, you see three men playing oud. I think they're all brothers, Les Trio Joubran. And I chose this picture partly so you could see kind of the sides of the instruments. They're pear-shaped and very round, and some of them have this beautiful detailing with the wood that they're made of. I also chose this picture because Les Trio Joubran is well known for playing, for combining poetry and music. And in fact, before the death of Mahmoud Darwish, who was Palestine's most famous poet, they often appeared together. They would play, he would recite poetry, or maybe they put them together in sort of a synthesis kind of way there. But all that to preface this poem by Sara Saleh, Palestinian Australian, called Oud. You tell me you're not really into oud when I have dedicated my life to mastery of us. It takes discipline, I say. They tried to call it theirs, but it is part of my body. The oud cannot give you anything unless you give of yourself. You give and you spend time and you hold it. You have to hold it well for it to share its secrets. Nobody likes to remember the death that walked the streets with us. We never stop playing, as though if we do, we will forget. We never stop playing. Maybe that means we have lost.
Wonderful. Very, very touching. Yeah.
I like this poem because Maya Abu Alhayyat had that comment about abandoning the metaphorical. And I don't think, a poet never 100% abandons the metaphorical, but I like how this poem in particular is about playing the oud, but it's also about making a connection between music and memory, between the practice of an instrument and the practice of an identity, maybe. That's what I see in it, at least.
Yeah.
And also, just I forgot to mention before I started, Sara Saleh wrote this poem in English. She mostly writes in English, but for the anthology where it was published, she worked with the translator Wajdan Shamala to translate it into Arabic. So, and I think that's interesting that these translations are going both ways, so that more and more people can read Palestinian poetry.
Which raises a good point, which I have held throughout the many years I've done this kind of work, that people in the Middle East are very literate and very well known, very well read and cosmopolitan, and they know about our Western culture. But here in the West, we are really very provincial, and we know almost nothing about the sophistication, the beauty, the nuances of Middle East culture. And I'm so grateful for you bringing that to us. To me, it's such an essential point. There's a whole wonderful civilization over there, wonderful people. And you've done us a great service by bringing us 4 of these wonderful poets and poems. What would be a simple way of getting more of this poetry? You mentioned some of them are not yet in English. We could Google the 4 names of the 4 poets would be one. I mean, something people can remember. And if they really want to pursue it, write to commonhumanity.org, info@commonhumanity, and we'll work on this. But just a simple takeaway is you could Google these 4 names.
Yeah, and then that will lead you to another poet, or just if you type in Palestinian poetry and translation, then you'll get to websites that that specialize in that, and you can get maybe a smattering of many different poets. If one of these appeal to you, but you wonder what else is out there. And then also, if you're very interested, I can send along a list of titles of books. This one isn't poetry in particular, but it has a lot of essays and anyway. And your local library, if it doesn't have them, can order them through interlibrary loan and that kind of thing.
Actually, we will be posting this on our Common Humanity website, on our Facebook page, and on our YouTube. I don't know if I can type this into the YouTube channel, but we can certainly put this on Facebook and our website. So if you have a couple of titles to highlight, I can certainly enter those on when we post this video.
Yeah.
Regrettably, we are pushing towards the end of our half hour. We have a little bit more time, and I want to check if there are any questions there. But while I check for questions, we have a tradition on this program, which is we ask all of our guests, which is, what can we do for peace? This is the Common Humanity Peace Channel. And it's a profoundly big and complicated, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway, because I know you're smart. I know you're a good person, and you're my beloved niece. What can each of us do for peace? What is something we can do in a world that seems to be full of anger and violence?
Listen, you can listen. And I think poetry is a good practice for listening, and it is a form of listening itself. Um, some people are afraid of poetry. They feel like they have to understand right away what it means. Sometimes poetry you just experience it. And likewise, when you listen to someone, you don't have to understand right away what they mean. You might just listen and hear them and try to understand what they're feeling. So I think there's a big connection between poetry and peace, and the practice of reading poetry and listening to people. Yeah.
Thanks, Doug, for your encouraging words. Abigail writes, she got tuned in a little bit late. How can I watch the recording? Again, we post this on our website in about Monday or Tuesday, maybe Wednesday at the latest, commonhumanity.org. commonhumanity.org. It'll be on the homepage for the next couple of weeks. We also have a YouTube channel. You look for Common Humanity Peace Channel under YouTube, and we'll be posting this on Facebook as well. I want to thank you, Angela. Let me see if there are any questions here. While I check for questions, we are having these programs every 2 weeks, first and third Saturday of each month. In 2 weeks from right now, we're going to have a wonderful program on Iraqi art. A dear friend of mine and a wonderful painter from Iraq, Ahmed Abdul Razik, is going to be talking about his paintings. And I'm very happy to report, I just got word this morning that I think it's going to be sometime in March. We don't have an exact date yet. We're going to be reading Rumi together. There's going to be 2 scholars in Iran, and myself, probably, I can't resist the temptation to be one of this, and somebody else. We're going to be reading Rumi together. So a Rumi expert was going to recommend a poem, and we'll look at it ahead of time, and then we'll get an Iranian perspective on Rumi. And then I will be bold enough, and some other courageous soul will be bold enough to offer.
That's really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when did you say?
Well, we don't have an exact date yet, but
Okay.
I think it's going to be March.
So near New Year, right? Near Nowruz, right?
I guess so. You're ahead of me there.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So visit our website, commonhumanity.org. If you want to help support this effort, if you want to buy some beautiful art, we have posters for sale. We have blank note cards for sale. And one other very special thing I want to remind people of, we are offering peace webinars with one of the artists we work with. I was in Baghdad the first week of December in 1998 during the terrible sanctions, and I suffered 4 nights of American bombing. And I didn't know it at the time, but 20 years later, I ran across a wonderful Iraqi artist who was living not very far from where my hotel was. And she and her family also underwent these 4 nights of bombing and the rest of the war, which I didn't go through. So we're offering a web peace seminar for individual classes, peace groups. If you're part of a Middle East peace group, we'll offer that to you. Contact at info@commonhumanity.org. Our website is commonhumanity.org. Let's see if there's one more question for our distinguished guest.
I think actually I will take this quick opportunity to share my screen because I have some photos that that help me remember my time in Nablus last spring. The top picture is out of my kitchen window facing east, sunrise on one of my last days there before I had to fly back. And you can't quite see, but this is a mosque here. And then if I walked out of my apartment, then I was very near the top of the mountains, the 2 mountains that define Nablus. On the western edge, I can walk out and get a picture of the sunset. And just beyond there, and in fact, in real life, you can see the Mediterranean Sea just beyond. So it's actually very close, but yet so far away beyond those beautiful, beautiful hills. but anyway, so I thought I'd end this presentation with sort of a sunrise and a sunset, and that symbolize my love for spending days in Palestine.
And I'm going to take a wild guess here. You're going to go back sometime.
Yes, as soon as they'll let me in.
How did I know that? Thank you, Vanetta, for your kind words, Vanetta. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Abigail. And most of all, thank you, Angela, my dear cousin and distinguished Fulbright scholar. Come back and join us in 2 weeks, and maybe we can have Angela back again one of these times to talk some more about Palestinian poetry. Thank you all. Thank our viewers. This is going to be posted on our website, and come back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.